Blood on pristine snow, a shattered soul. She was exiled to freeze, brutally discarded by the mate who was destined to protect her. But as her heart slowed to its final, agonizing beats, the monster of legend didn't tear her apart. The massive black wolf curled around her, radiating salvation. In the bitter winter of 1342, the world was a canvas of unforgiving white. Nestled deep within the treacherous, jagged valleys of the Northern Territories, the Aylesbury pack survived through absolute ruthlessness. This was not a time of fairy tales. It was a brutal medieval reality where grain was scarce, winters were deadly, and the laws of the wolf were absolute. Juliet was the daughter of the pack's tanner, Arthur, and a seamstress named Martha. She possessed no royal blood, no vast tracts of land, and no political leverage. What she did have was an ancient, untamed lineage of healers, a quiet strength, and a spirit that had captured the gaze of Tristan, the alpha heir. For 3 years, Tristan had courted her in secret. Behind the shadow of the great stone keep, he had woven promises into her hair, whispering that when the winter solstice arrived and their wolves matured, the moon goddess would undoubtedly reveal them as true mates. Juliet believed him. She loved him with the fierce, naive devotion of a woman who had never known the sting of absolute betrayal. The night of the solstice gathering was bitter cold, the air thick with the scent of wood smoke, roasting venison, and the nervous sweat of unmated wolves. Tallow candles flickered in the grand hall of the Aylesbury Keep. Hundreds of pack members from Thomas the village blacksmith to Eleanor the baker huddled around the grand hearths. At the center of the dais stood Alpha Richard, a scarred, hardened man who viewed his pack not as a family, but as a military asset. Beside him stood his son, Tristan, looking regal in pelts of silver fox and boiled leather armor. When Juliet stepped forward to present herself, her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. As Tristan descended the stone steps, their eyes met. The fabled mate bond, an undeniable, electric pull that tied 2 souls together, flared to life. It was a tangible heat that rushed through Juliet's veins, smelling of winter pine and rain. She smiled, stepping toward him, her hand outstretched. Tristan stopped. He felt it too. She saw the widening of his pupils, the slight gasp that escaped his lips. But then, his gaze flicked over Juliet's simple woolen dress, past her hopeful eyes, and landed on someone standing in the shadows of the high table. It was Lady Beatrice. Beatrice was the daughter of Lord Henry, the alpha of the wealthy river packs to the south. She brought with her a dowry of steel, vast hunting grounds, and an army of 300 wolves. For a pack facing famine like Aylesbury, Beatrice was salvation. Juliet was merely a tanner's daughter. Tristan's jaw tightened. The warmth in his eyes froze over, replaced by a calculating, deadened stare. He looked back at Juliet, his expression twisting into one of feigned disgust. "Tristan," Juliet whispered, her voice barely carrying over the crackling fires. "I, Tristan of the Aylesbury pack." His voice boomed, echoing off the stone walls, silencing the entire hall. "Reject you, Juliet, as my mate." The words were a physical blow. The mate bond, freshly ignited, was violently severed. It felt as though a serrated blade had been dragged down Juliet's spine. She dropped to her knees, screaming in agony as blood poured from her nose and the fragile tether between their souls snapped. The pain was blinding, suffocating, a true physiological trauma that left her gasping for air on the cold stone floor. "Why?" she choked out, clutching her chest, staring up at the man who had held her just a week prior. Tristan did not flinch. "You are unworthy. A weak bloodline cannot lead this pack through the coming wars." But the cruelty did not end there. Lady Beatrice stepped forward, a triumphant smirk playing on her lips. She unrolled a forged parchment. "Not merely unworthy," Beatrice declared, her voice dripping with venom, "but a traitor. We intercepted this letter. Juliet has been passing our patrol routes to the rogue factions in the southern valleys. She hoped to see us slaughtered so her peasant family could scavenge the ruins." "Lies!" Arthur, Juliet's father, pushed through the crowd, but 2 massive guards immediately subdued him, slamming the older man to the floor. "She has done nothing." "Tristan, you know this is a lie." Tristan looked away. He knew it was a forgery. He knew Juliet was innocent, but he needed Beatrice's army, and Beatrice demanded the complete and public destruction of her rival. "The penalty for treason is death," Alpha Richard pronounced coldly from the throne. "But seeing as it is the solstice, we will be merciful. Exile. Strip her of her winter cloaks and cast her into the bloodwood. If the moon goddess favors her, she will survive. If not, the winter will claim her. Mercy." It was a death sentence, merely outsourced to the snow. They stripped Juliet of her heavy furs, leaving her only in a thin linen shift and a worn leather corset. The crowd, her friends, her neighbors, Thomas, Eleanor, people she had healed of fever and helped through childbirth, turned their backs. Fear of the Alpha's wrath kept them silent. Bruised, bleeding, and shattered from the rejected bond, Juliet was dragged to the heavy iron gates of the keep. With a resounding clang, the gates slammed shut behind her. She was entirely alone in the howling dark of the worst blizzard of the decade. The cold of the bloodwood was not merely a temperature. It was a living, breathing predator. It sank its teeth into Juliet's bare arms and gnawed at her unprotected extremities. The snow was already waist-deep in places, and the wind shrieked through the barren, skeletal branches of the ancient oaks like the wails of the damned. Juliet stumbled forward, her bare feet sinking into the freezing powder. Every step was an agony of ice and tearing muscles. The rejection of the mate bond had severely weakened her wolf. Inside her mind, her inner beast whimpered in despair, refusing to surface, refusing to shift, to protect them from the cold. When a mate rejects you, the wolf often welcomes death. "I must keep moving," she told herself, though the words felt sluggish even in her own mind. "If I stop, I die." Hours bled into a timeless void of white and black. The physical stages of freezing to death took hold of her with merciless precision. First came the violent shivering, her body's desperate, rattling attempt to generate heat. Her teeth chattered so hard she tasted blood in her mouth. Then came the numbness. The excruciating pain in her fingers and toes simply vanished, replaced by deadened blocks of wood. She fell. She pushed herself up. She fell again, her hands sinking into snowdrifts that felt like concrete. The psychological torment was worse than the cold. In the swirling snow, she saw phantoms. She saw Tristan's warm smile, felt his hands in her hair. She heard Beatrice's cruel laughter echoing in the wind. The betrayal was a festering wound in her chest, a hollow void that the cold rushed in to fill. Why survive? To be a rogue? To be hunted? Eventually, the shivering stopped. This was the final, most dangerous stage of hypothermia. A strange, deceitful warmth began to spread through her limbs. Her brain, starving for oxygen and freezing within her skull, misfired. She felt an overwhelming urge to sleep, just for a moment, just to rest her eyes. Juliet collapsed at the base of a massive, hollowed-out ancient elm. She curled into a tight ball, the snow quickly dusting over her trembling frame. The world grew quiet. The howling wind seemed to fade into a gentle hum. She closed her eyes, surrendering to the heavy, peaceful blanket of the dark. Crunch, crunch, crunch. The sound of heavy paws breaking through the crusted snow vibrated against the ground beneath her cheek. Juliet was too weak to open her eyes, too far gone to feel fear. A wild beast coming to claim her corpse was almost a relief. A massive shadow fell over her. Even through her closed eyelids, she could sense the sheer scale of the creature. Then came the scent. It was not the scent of a mindless rogue or a starved forest predator. It was overwhelming petrichor, crushed obsidian, deep earth, and wild, untamed magic. It was a scent so potent it made the dying embers of her wolf jolt violently awake, thrashing against her ribcage. A heavy, huffing breath washed over her face, blowing the snow from her eyelashes. The air was incredibly hot. Juliet forced her eyelids open by a fraction. Above her stood a wolf of monstrous proportions. He was as tall as a warhorse, his fur the color of a void, absorbing the faint moonlight. His eyes, glowing like liquid amber, stared down at her. He was terrifying, a demon of the woods. "Eat me," she thought numbly. "Just make it quick." But the monster did not bare his teeth. Instead, the giant black wolf let out a low, rumbling whine, that sounded inexplicably like grief. He pawed at the snow around her, clearing a space, and then, to her absolute shock, he laid down. He didn't just lie beside her, he enveloped her. The massive beast curled his colossal body entirely around her freezing, fragile frame. He tucked his heavy, furred snout over her legs and draped his thick, bushy tail over her chest and neck. The heat radiating from him was instantaneous and staggering. It was like being wrapped in a roaring hearth fire. The black wolf pressed his chest firmly against her back, his powerful heartbeat thudding against her spine. Thump, 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 thump. The rhythm was perfectly synchronized with her own failing heart, coaxing it, commanding it to keep beating. Juliet gasped as the agonizing process of thawing began. The warmth was saving her life, but the proximity of this beast was doing something else. The void left by Tristan's rejection was suddenly filled with a rushing, roaring tide of energy. It was a mate bond, but not the fragile, flickering candle flame she had felt with Tristan. This was a roaring inferno. This was a mountain collapsing. The sheer weight of the spiritual connection made her gasp, her fingers twitching as they buried themselves instinctively into the thick, dark fur of her savior. Then, the darkness claimed her entirely, pulling her into a deep, healing unconsciousness. When Juliet finally awoke, the biting wind was gone. She was no longer lying in the snow. She opened her eyes slowly. The air was warm, smelling of dried herbs, roasted meat, and that intoxicating scent of petrichor and dark earth. She was lying on a massive bed of thick, luxurious furs, bear, elk, and sable. The ceiling above her was made of vaulted, ancient stone, illuminated by the warm, golden glow of a massive, roaring fireplace. It looked like the ruins of an old fortress, secretly repaired and made habitable. She pushed herself up, wincing, as her stiff muscles protested. She was no longer in her frozen linen shift. Someone had dressed her in an oversized, soft woolen tunic that swam on her frame. Panic flared momentarily. Where was she? Where was the giant wolf? Drink this. Slowly. The voice was a deep, gravelly baritone that vibrated through the stone floor and straight into her bones. Juliet flinched, pulling the furs up to her chin, and looked toward the hearth. Sitting in a carved wooden chair beside the fire was a man. He was huge, broad-shouldered and heavily muscled, wrapped in a dark tunic and leather breeches. His dark hair was long and wild, falling past his shoulders, framing a face that was strikingly handsome but marred by 3 jagged, faded claw scars running down the left side of his jaw. His eyes, fixed entirely on her, were the exact liquid amber of the monster in the woods. He stood, holding an iron mug, and moved toward her with the silent, terrifying grace of a predator. Juliet scrambled backward until her back hit the stone wall. "Who are you?" she croaked, her throat raw. The man paused at the edge of the bed. His expression was completely guarded, a mask of stone, but his amber eyes betrayed a raging storm of emotion. "You shouldn't be alive," he said softly, ignoring her question. "Anyone else would have frozen within the hour. Your wolf fought hard." You're the black wolf." She stared at him, the pieces clicking into place. She inhaled deeply, and the scent hit her again, dizzying and absolute. You're my. She couldn't say it. Not after Tristan. The word was poison. The man's jaw tightened. He set the mug on a wooden crate near the bed. "I am Gideon," he said, the name hanging heavily in the air. Juliet's breath hitched. Her blood ran cold for a completely different reason. Gideon. Every pup in the Northern Territories knew that name. He was the ghost story parents told to frighten their children. Gideon the Black. The older brother of Alpha Richard. The true heir to the Aylesbury pack, who was said to have gone violently insane 10 years ago, slaughtered half the guard, and was executed by his own brother. But he wasn't dead. He was standing right here. "You're a ghost," she whispered, trembling. Gideon offered a bitter, humorless smile. "I assure you, little bird, I am entirely flesh and blood." Richard merely lacked the strength to finish the job he started. He leaned closer, resting his large hands on the edge of the mattress. The sheer proximity of him made Juliet's pulse race. And you are the girl Tristan cast aside for a few hundred swords. Juliet flinched, looking away. The shame burned her cheeks. You saw. I see everything that happens in my woods, Gideon murmured, his voice dropping an octave, becoming dangerously soft. He reached out, hesitating for a fraction of a second, before gently brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. His touch sent a shockwave of electricity straight to her toes. He is a fool. A weak, blind fool. Juliet looked up at him, tears welling in her eyes. He was my mate. Gideon's eyes flashed with sudden, terrifying possessiveness. The amber glowed brightly in the dim light. No, he growled, the sound vibrating deep in his chest. He was a genetic echo. A false positive caused by the weakening bloodlines of Richard's tainted pack. Gideon leaned in, his face inches from hers, his breath warm against her lips. You felt it when I held you in the snow, Juliet. I know you did. You belong to me, and I do not discard what is mine. The ruined fortress of Caerleon, hidden deep within the heart of the Bloodwood, became Juliet's sanctuary. Over the next month, as the worst of the winter storms battered the northern territories, the dying embers of her spirit were painstakingly stoked back into a roaring fire. Gideon was not the mindless, bloodthirsty monster the legends claimed. He was quiet, fiercely intelligent, and carried a sorrow so dense it seemed to shadow his every movement. As her frostbite healed beneath poultices of yarrow, raw honey, and Salix alba, a willow bark remedy her mother had taught her, Juliet learned the truth about the true alpha of Aylesbury. I never lost my mind, Gideon told her one evening. The firelight danced across the jagged scars on his jaw as he sharpened a massive broadsword forged of Lancaster steel. The rhythmic kash of the whetstone was strangely comforting. It was the night of the blood moon, 10 years ago. Richard and I were leading a raid against southern poachers. We shared a flagon of wine before the battle. I didn't know he had laced my cup with silver dust and nightshade. Juliet paused her mending, a needle suspended halfway through a torn linen shirt. Silver and nightshade, that wouldn't just poison you. It would drive your wolf into an agonizing, hallucinogenic frenzy. Exactly, Gideon growled softly, his amber eyes darkening at the memory. When the battle commenced, I couldn't distinguish friend from foe. My vision swam in red. My own brothers stood back and watched as I tore through our own ranks in blind agony, trying to escape the burning in my veins. When I collapsed, exhausted and dying, Richard proclaimed me mad. He told the pack I was a danger, ordered my execution, and took the Alpha command. But he didn't kill you. He tried, Gideon murmured, touching the scars on his face. He dragged me into the Bloodwood, slashed my throat, and left me for the scavengers. But he underestimated the resilience of a true Alpha lineage. The forest hid me. The cold slowed my bleeding. I survived, but I knew if I returned, Richard would simply assassinate me quietly. I needed to heal. I needed to wait for the pack to see him for the tyrant he truly is. Juliet set down her sewing, her heart aching for the immense betrayal he had suffered. It mirrored her own, tying their souls together with threads of shared trauma. But unlike Tristan's fragile, politically motivated promises, the bond she felt with Gideon was a physical anchor. It hummed in her blood. When he was near, her previously dormant, weakened wolf stretched and purred in her mind, growing stronger by the day, fueled by his pure alpha aura. Tristan rejected me because he thought my bloodline was weak, Juliet whispered, staring into the hearth. He chose Beatrice's 300 swords over his true mate. Gideon set down his blade and crossed the stone floor, kneeling beside her chair. His massive hands enveloped hers, rough and calloused, yet incredibly gentle. Your bloodline is the rarest in the kingdoms, Juliet. You are descended from the first healers. You do not carry a sword because you are meant to be the shield. You are the only one capable of grounding an alpha's rage. Tristan was simply too weak to hold you. He leaned closer, his scent of petrichor and dark pine wrapping around her like a protective cloak. I am not weak, and I am tired of hiding in the snow. The inciting spark came 3 days later. Gideon returned from a patrol, not with game, but with a bloodied scrap of Lincoln green wool. It was the cloak of a Darrow scout, Lady Beatrice's clan. They have crossed the river, Gideon announced, his voice tight with barely suppressed fury. He began buckling a harness of boiled leather over his chest. Richard and Tristan are marching alongside Lord Henry's forces into the Bloodwood. They claim they are hunting rogues, but the numbers are too vast. Henry has brought nearly 500 wolves. Juliet stood, a cold realization washing over her. It's an annexation, she breathed. Beatrice's forged letter about me. It was a test of Tristan's loyalty, yes, but also a distraction. Lord Henry doesn't want an alliance with Aylesbury. He wants to conquer it. If he gets his army inside the Bloodwood, he can flank the keep. Tristan has invited their executioners right to our doorstep. My brother traded our pack's sovereignty for a southern bride, Gideon snarled, strapping the Lancaster broadsword to his back. I will not let my people be slaughtered for their ignorance. Then we stop them, Juliet said. Her voice did not shake. The frightened, heartbroken girl who had curled up to die in the snow was gone. In her place stood a woman thrumming with raw, untamed power. Her eyes, usually a soft hazel, briefly flashed a brilliant, luminescent silver. Gideon looked at her, his breath catching in his throat. A slow, dangerous smile spread across his scarred face. We? I am your mate, Gideon of Aylesbury, she declared, stepping into his space, the bond roaring to life between them, practically vibrating the dust off the stone walls. Your pack is my pack. Let us show Tristan exactly what he threw away. The clearing known as the Weeping Hollow was a graveyard of frozen, ancient pines. Here, the pristine snow was rapidly trampled into gray slush by the marching boots and heavy paws of Lord Henry's vanguard. At the head of the column rode Tristan, flanked by Alpha Richard and the smug, fur-draped Lady Beatrice. Behind them, an army of Darrow mercenaries and Aylesbury guards marched in an uneasy, tense alliance. Tristan's chest tightened with gnawing anxiety. The Bloodwood was unnervingly quiet. He had expected to find starving, disorganized rogues clinging to survival, but they had found nothing but an empty, freezing wilderness that felt like a trap. Perhaps your scouts were mistaken about these coordinates, Beatrice, Richard grumbled, adjusting his heavy bear fur cloak against the biting wind. There are no rogue camps here. We are wasting daylight. Patience, Alpha, Beatrice purred, though her eyes darted nervously to the dark, impenetrable tree line. My father's men know these woods. A sudden, earth-shattering roar ripped through the freezing air, silencing the crunch of hundreds of boots. It was a sound so primal, so utterly dominant, that several of the younger wolves immediately dropped to their knees, their hands clutching their ears as their inner beasts whimpered in raw submission. From the deep shadows of the massive pines stepped a man. He wore no heavy furs, only a dark tunic and scarred leather armor, an immense broadsword resting casually on his broad shoulder. Alpha Richard's face drained of all color. He pulled his horse's reins so violently the beast reared back, hooves kicking at the frosty air. No, Richard gasped, his eyes wide with absolute terror. It cannot be. Hello, brother, Gideon called out, his voice echoing through the hollow, laced with deadly, terrifying calm. You are trespassing in my woods. Frantic whispers erupted through the Aylesbury ranks. The ghost, the black wolf, Gideon, the older guards, those who vividly remembered the true heir, visibly paled. Tristan hastily drew his sword, though his hand shook violently. You are a rogue, a madman! Guards, strike him down! But not a single Aylesbury guard moved. The sheer, suffocating weight of Gideon's pure alpha aura pinned them to the frozen earth. He is no madman, Tristan. A clear, melodic feminine voice rang out. From behind Gideon stepped Juliet. She was breathtaking. The tattered, freezing peasant girl was a distant memory. She wore a tailored coat of dark wolf pelt over crimson leather, radiating a quiet, immovable strength that perfectly balanced the chaotic storm of Gideon's terrifying presence. The luminescent silver glow in her eyes was unmistakable, the ancient mark of a true Luna. Tristan gasped, nearly dropping his blade. The severed mate bond in his chest gave a phantom, agonizing throb. Juliet? You survived? How? He looked between her and the massive man beside her, a sickening realization dawning upon him. You mated the monster. I mated the true alpha, Juliet corrected, her voice cutting through the wind like shattered glass. She looked directly at Beatrice, whose arrogant smirk had entirely vanished. "And I see you brought the invasion force you always planned, Beatrice. Tell me, Lord Henry, when did you plan to slaughter my people? Before or after the wedding feast?" Lord Henry, a cruel-faced man at the rear of the vanguard, cursed loudly, drawing his own weapon. "Kill them both. Slay the Aylesbury fools and take the territory." The fragile illusion of the alliance shattered instantly. The Darrow mercenaries turned their weapons on the confused, outflanked Aylesbury guards. Chaos erupted in the snowy clearing, but Gideon did not draw his sword. Instead, he threw his head back and shifted. The transformation was instantaneous. Bones cracked and reformed in a violent blur until the massive, horse-sized black wolf stood in his place, his amber eyes burning with hellfire. With a deafening snarl, the black wolf lunged into the Darrow ranks, tossing armored men into the air like weightless ragdolls. Tristan, panicked and desperate to salvage his ruined pride, spurred his horse toward Juliet, raising his sword. "You traitorous wretch!" he screamed. Juliet did not flinch. She let out a breath that plumed in the freezing air and embraced the power she had buried for so long. She shifted. She exploded into a stunning, pure white timber wolf, her fur shimmering with a pearlescent, ethereal sheen. As Tristan swung his blade, the white wolf ducked effortlessly beneath the deadly arc, snapping her jaws around the foreleg of his horse. The beast bucked, sending Tristan crashing violently into the slush. Juliet pinned him immediately, her massive white paws pressing into his chest, her razor-sharp teeth hovering mere inches from his exposed throat. Tristan stared up at her, utterly defeated, hot tears freezing on his cheeks. He felt the terrifying, pure power radiating from her. He had traded a goddess for a snake, Juliet. "Please," he whimpered. The white wolf offered no forgiveness, only letting out a commanding, ear-piercing howl. The sound resonated across the bloody battlefield. The Aylesbury guards, seeing their true alpha and his magnificent Luna fighting for them, finally shook off their shock. They rallied behind the black wolf, turning their collective fury upon the Darrows. Within minutes, the battle was decidedly over. The southern forces broke and fled into the trees. Lady Beatrice was dragged from her horse by an Aylesbury blacksmith and thrown to the ground beside the defeated Alpha Richard. Gideon shifted back, completely unharmed, and walked slowly toward his brother. Richard was trembling, scrambling backward in the red-stained snow. "You stole 10 years from me, Richard," Gideon said, picking up a discarded broadsword. "You starved our people." "I am the Alpha!" Richard screamed, a pathetic sound. "No," Gideon replied softly. With one swift, merciless swing, the usurper's dark reign ended forever. Silence fell over the clearing. The surviving Aylesbury guards slowly dropped to their knees in the snow, exposing their necks in ultimate, absolute submission. Tristan knelt beside them, broken and sobbing. Gideon dropped the bloodied sword and walked through the kneeling crowd until he reached the magnificent white wolf. As Juliet shifted back, standing tall in the frigid air, Gideon reached out, gently cupping her face in his large, warm hands. "My Luna," he whispered reverently, pressing his forehead against hers, their bond burning brighter than the winter sun. Did Juliet's epic revenge give you chills? If you loved this thrilling tale of betrayal, true mates, and dark medieval werewolf drama, do not let the story end right here. Smash that like button, share this video with your fellow fantasy lovers, and subscribe to our channel for more immersive audio stories. Ring the notification bell so you never miss a new upload. What should happen next? Comment below today.